Hey, it's BreiEndia again, part two of my day four self-exposing day and my 90-day self-journeys retreat in 808 Tavern. We're currently in June 27, 2020, and I'm continuing from the part one of today's self-exposing. So I mentioned just a recap of my first chapter being age birth to 7, where I went through molestation by a woman, and chapter 2 being exposed to different drugs, addictions, and learning about the heaviness of loyalty and to have your trust be broken, and learning about betrayal and deceit when it comes to family relationships, friendships, and just any type of kinship in all. So as I was saying on chapter 2, just to close out my chapter 2, other than the addictions and the things that were heavy on me that have been deeply rooted in my inner childhood wounds, I definitely also learned about boyfriends and myself too. So I used to look at it like, okay, if you ask me out, you're pursuing me. So when boys used to do that and then they get upset that I'm talking to other boys, I would say, well, you wanted to be my boyfriend. I never really confirmed that I was just your girlfriend. And that's because I was still growing. I was still young-minded. And I viewed my childhood as a childhood. I wanted to be a child. And I wanted to enjoy being a child. But unfortunately, in my generation, there was a lot of adult activities going on around me, influences, and, some things I did easily get influenced by. There were times I was out with boys and I shouldn't have been. I was out with friends who were really, advanced in this type of energy, and I just was, doing things that were out of my character. But fortunately, I held tight to my virginity and to my morals and my values, just because I had certain things that I did and did not want to do in my life until I got to a certain point. And I will say the most beautiful thing that I picked up out of all of the things that burdened me and was heavy on me was my writing. So when I had a friend that was close to me end up hooking me up with somebody, and then turning around, somebody who was the cousin of someone she dated, and then she turned around and slept with that same person behind my back, and then they had like a whole thing going on. It didn't last that long for me and him, but I even learned forgiveness then. And back then is when I truly learned how to observe, accept, and forgive people for doing things that I felt like were wrong against me, and to forgive myself for constantly blaming and pointing the finger, because people are going to be people. I'm not perfect. We all do things that we don't know is right or wrong. And not to mention when it came to gaining friends who ended up liking someone I used to date. I didn't care if I wasn't with him anymore. If he's willing and wanting to be with you and he's willing to do that, be my guest. That's how it was. I never really did the most to try to fight for something that wasn't fighting for me. So that's something that I'm still kind of working on right now, to see and choose how I want to move forward with thinking about that. But because I'm on a celibacy journey, I'm happy that I am not having any more sexual ties. And that is one thing that I'm very just so happy about right now, is being free from that, since molestation was the first time that I've had an encounter. And although it was with a woman, I grew to my chapter 3, which is the most valid chapter, I'd say, because I was transitioning from high school to college, from adolescence to adult, from a girl to a woman, from arguing with my dad and going back and forth to him kicking me out and being homeless and having to figure it out on my own, and moving to Atlanta to really just trying to get myself on my own 2 feet and become grounded into who I was going to become. And that was probably the most life-changing move for me. Everything about that, because I was so young, was like necessary. The family that took me in was best friends with this woman who used to take me out for track practice in high school. And she basically took me in. My grandmother let me stay sometimes, my aunt, and the guy I was dating, his mother, also let me stay with them sometimes. But ultimately, my car was the first place that I laid my head for the first few nights after I got kicked out. And although my father now says that I was always welcome to come back home, it was never verbally said to me. So because it wasn't I was a rebel, and I said, I'm just going to prove my point that I can take care of myself. And that was always a thing that I was holding on tight to. But now I've let that go because of the simple fact that when I was broken down, I did go back home recently, and it was a good thing because I only stayed there for a small period of time. But being there, I was able to rekindle the love between me and my mom and me and my dad, and allow there to be another comforting union of family. And that is now why I'm also at peace, because a lot of the things that they didn't know that I went through as a child, they now know, and they know my truth, and I can live in my truth. So I started to dance as well as joining the military in chapter 3. So I picked up 2 different life paths, and I was carrying these things, chapter 3 and chapter 4, up until last year. And I feel as though the heaviest burden that I had to shed light on and heal from in my past trauma of chapter 3 was the domestic violence and the episode of premeditated rape. I'm thankful that I wasn't raped by that particular person, but I did unfortunately have a lot of burdens from being cheated on, lied to, and having a gun pulled out me, and my body being thrown into a kitchen wall, and you know what I'm saying? Like, things that I had to grow and realize I didn't deserve, and that I didn't need to be silent about. And I was silent about it for a very long time. I had friends, male friends in the military, who didn't understand me and why I was still dealing with the situation, and I didn't understand me and why I was still dealing with the situation. But I got the strength, ironically, to get out of the relationship because of him betraying me through sleeping with another woman. Not because of the abuse, but because of him sleeping with another woman. And ultimately, it took chapter 4 for me to take the time to really realize what I was going through was not deserved. And I met someone who brought back God into my line of sight. Since I had lost my virginity to someone prior to marriage, I didn't set the standards correctly after high school because I was so busy trying to prove a point about my independence. And I allowed my virginity to be taken very young. I feel as though waiting till 18 wasn't enough for me because I had true standards and things that I had wanted to follow. And although I did wait until it was a stable relationship in my head, it wasn't a stable relationship, and nobody should allow themselves to go through abuse, and you shouldn't keep your mouth shut when you have people who do love you and care about you and would have never allowed you to go through it as long as you did. So I had regrets about carrying that burden for so long, but in 2019 I was fortunately able to let that thing go and let that burden heal, let those wounds heal, and even break bread with that person to let them know that I've forgiven and I've moved forward, and life goes on. So my chapter 4, I did try again with this person. It didn't work out because there was a continuation of the abuse, and I just had to let it go. And then I met someone. I was dating people in between and had sexual encounters, and then I got used to being single, and I wanted to be single for a while. So chapter 4 has been a journey of me being single, but not really being single, like single and dating. But then I dated someone who brought God back into my life, and he introduced me to prayer with someone that you're in a relationship with. And because I hadn't had that before, it really opened up my mind to setting standards for myself for the relationships that I have, but more so setting standards based on myself first. So after meeting him and having betrayed him, I learned that there were things that I needed to heal about myself. And it was very hard because I'm not a person who is okay with hurting other people. So it took me some time to heal from him. And then also because I had carried a child in which I had been sleeping with other people, and me and him had been on and off, but we were very on. And it was like, okay, I need to heal from this relationship because I cannot continue to try to keep bringing a child into this world, even if it's a mistake, knowing that I'm not ready. I was in the military. I had all these other plans for my actual life, and I should have been focused on those things more than I was on relationships. But I had it backwards. I was investing time into the wrong things, and I am realizing that myself. And I'm glad to have been able to recognize that even now, because although I was focused on the wrong things, I was trying to balance too many things at once. And I have completed my journey. I have completed school. I have completed, the first cycle of the military, and I'm honorably, and I'm grateful for the things that were lost as much as the things that were gained and the things that were learned, kept, and received. And the journey is only continuing. Being married as well as losing a child within chapter 4 were the heaviest burdens out of every chapter. Out of every chapter, they were the heaviest burdens. Ultimately, the marriage wasn't necessarily the burden. It was the divorce. The baby wasn't the burden. It was the loss. It was the pain of believing that I wasn't going to have help while it was being finding out that my grandmother had blood clots traveling to her heart. My mother had a tumor potentially cancerous. And then I had found out that I could, potentially lose the child or lose my life giving childbirth, because it was already a threatened type of pregnancy. And they were talking about my heart rate being low, the baby's heart rate being low, the fibroids and the cysts, and just things that I just was not ready to hear at all. And it was a very heavy thing, knowing that I hadn't been tied to any type of relationship. So then I felt bad about bringing a child in the world for some reason. And I didn't take care of my health. I literally stopped going to class. I stopped eating for like a week. Nobody really knew what was going on with me because I wore the smile, and wore the dress for homecoming and told maybe a few people, but didn't really have any answers that helped me to feel like I was going to be okay. And then the way that it was lost, it was like I felt worse because I was premeditating abortion. So ultimately, there's a lot with that whole situation because, I feel like I'm almost like a murderer. But ultimately, I gave all of that to God. I prayed about the healing and forgiveness, and I repented for the sins of even thinking the way that I was about things and being so vindictive about, the person that was the father asking me who was the dad, as if they don't understand what was going on. And then just all of the things that I was dealing with was coming down on me in a negative way. And I never, that year, which was 2017, and that is a part of my chapter 4, I never healed from it. And then I never even considered myself a mother because I buried a child, but I didn't have the child here with me physically. And then that's when my grandma started to kind of get me delving into spirituality to the point where she made me view it differently. She told me to include myself in that pool of being a mother and to accept that that was a part of my journey, to accept the loss, to accept the pain, and to allow myself to push through it. So, shouts out to my grandma Pat, or sister, that's what they call her. And ultimately, I'm just grateful for family because they kept me grounded. Through that, I'm grateful for, my line sisters of the Persian Angels, Insurgent Overload. They definitely had my back as much as they could. I don't know what they had behind my back, but I ultimately know to my face I had the support that I needed. Thank you to, certain people who were friends in my life that were males. They know who they are, as well as the other people in my life who know who they are, that were there for me, and especially my mother, because it was heavy on her as well, and she had me as well in her prayers every day. So we prayed together and we grew together, and along with my sisters, my blood sisters, and my brothers and my father, and family just started to, within this chapter, expose themselves. The good and the bad started to come out. I started to learn about my family in Louisiana and California, Ohio, New York, up and down the East Coast, the Carolinas. I already knew about my family in Georgia. And, of course, the DMV, DC, and Virginia. And, I just got to the point where I was like, okay, after losing a relationship with someone due to my behavior and not really recognizing that he had been older than me and maybe had been doing some things too behind my back, he didn't admit to those things. And ultimately, that gave me the feeling of defeat. And I'm going to continue this last portion, and that'll be my closeout for day 4.